everybody. Welcome back to the Fit and Healthy Athlete Podcast. I am so excited to have you here. I have Dr. Mandy Marziaz with us today, and we're going to talk all about peri and post-menopause and all of how it relates for our athletes. It's going to be a great podcast. We actually went to school together. So Dr. Mandy, welcome. Excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So give us a bit of background about you, a little bit of a bio. How did you get into working with peri and post menopause? I know you took a jaunt through the chiropractic world. So how'd you get here?
Yes. So my journey has been a long one. So I got into working in peri and post menopause when I was in chiropractic school, which was now about 11 years ago. My hormones crashed. I was in my late 30s and everything just kind of flatlined. And it was probably leading up for many, many years of being a marathon runner and a triathlete and getting into low energy availability with not eating right and over exercising. And when I added the stress of a medical school program on top of that, that was it. Like my cortisol was just done. And there was really no resources for me at the time. I was still in my late 30s, so I wanted to get pregnant, and I went and talked to OBs and reproductive endocrinologists, and they were just like, when it's gone, it's gone. You're not going to get your hormones back. And I didn't accept that answer, but I ended up having to do a lot of educating myself on that. And so through my own healing journey, I said, this is not acceptable that we just don't know anything about women's hormones and we're not talking about it.
Yeah.
And then fast forward 10 years later, here I am. So I did become a chiropractor, and I sold my practice during the pandemic, just wanted to get out of the brick and mortar business and felt really called to this functional medicine stuff. I have a background as a research biochemist. And so I really love nerding out on nutrition and physiology and all of that. And now here I am in my late 40s. I am going through my own perimenopausal journey. And again, most of the answers being offered to me are hormone replacement therapy, which I think has its place, but it's not the only answer.
Yep.
And just stop running. You're 47. You shouldn't be running marathons anymore. And I'm not accepting that either. But I'm also at a place where my body has had some challenges staying healthy and not getting injured and not feeling fatigued all the time. So it's really, I kind of become my own experiment, and then I go out and find clients that need help and help them.
I love that perspective. So, let's start off first with like perimenopause, as far as perimenopause for athletes, and taking like a functional medicine perspective. What have you learned? What have you figured out, as far as perimenopause for athletes? Where would you start if you wanted to take a functional medicine approach?
Yeah. So functional medicine is really, if you think about a tree and you've got the leaves and the branches, and then you've got the roots, right? Well, the leaves and the branches is what Western medicine is working on. And it's great. Like I said, it has its place. Sometimes we need it to get through the crisis, or, if you fall and you break your leg, like they're going to help you with that, but it's not getting at the cause. So when we're treating those branches and leaves with hormone replacement therapy and things like that, we're not asking like, why does the body need this? So functional medicine looks at the roots and tries to find your root cause. And normally it goes back many, many years. It didn't just start when you hit perimenopause. Unfortunately, that's when it all comes out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
And functional medicine, we get to spend more time with our patients. So I know you've probably been to your medical doctor and they see you for 5 or 10 minutes and you're like, how do you even know what's going on with me? I spend an hour with my clients on almost every visit. And so I get to know you and your story, and can really put together the pieces of the puzzle and how you ended up here. We're also looking at lifestyle interventions. So as I said, hormone replacement therapy can have its place, but I need to look at your foundation first. Like, how is your gut health? How is your stress? Stress is a huge one. You can have a perfect diet and the perfect supplements and all that. And if your stress is not good, then it's going to affect you. And remember, exercise is a stressor. It's great. There's good stress. We need stress. But if your whole life is in chaos and stress, and then you try to add athletic stress on top of it, you're going to hit some walls. And we're looking at sleep. Sleep is another big one, which tends to get dysregulated in perimenopause. And so we need to be sleeping so that we can recharge those batteries at night. So functional medicine is looking at all those roots. And then, we can add things on as needed, like hormone replacement. Um, so we're really, optimizing the systems in your body versus chasing your symptoms.
Totally.
And during this time, I guess you want to know some of the unique things that happen during.
Yeah,
You
we
wanna
can
go into
go
that?
there. Sure, sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
during this time, we get into kind of a lower hormone state. So, first thing I'll mention is, since many of us listening to this are athletes, if you had low energy availability, they used to call it the female athlete triad when you were younger, you're probably going to, in perimenopause, have all your hormones are just lower. So, a lot of times, what happens is we have estrogen and progesterone in balance, and progesterone normally falls off first at this time of life, and so that makes us estrogen dominant. But if we had that low energy availability, or we're still experiencing low energy availability, both of them will be low. So can be some slightly different symptoms with that.
Hmm.
Also, as you go into menopause, your estradiol, which is produced by your ovaries, is not, that's what gets turned down. We still produce some estrogen and from our adrenal glands and our fat cells, and that's called estrone. So estrone is just a weaker form of estrogen. So that's why you're not getting as much of the benefits of estrogen. I always say
Right.
estrogen is your best friend, and you don't realize it because when we have her and we're in our 20s, we're like, this causes PMS and cramps, and I don't want that. But
Yeah.
she really does a lot of good things as well.
Hmm.
Estrogen does things like promote insulin sensitivity. So you're able to utilize your blood sugar better. So a lot of us get some insulin resistance at this time. Helps us to control our body temperature, control our blood pressure. So all of these things help signal to our muscles to synthesize, to use the protein to synthesize muscle mass. So at this time, you want to make sure you're eating more protein and lifting
Yeah.
things, heavy things, so that you can get the signaling.
Yeah.
And your bone health will be affected by all of that. So it's a lot of things as athletes we have to think about. And some other things that we might not be thinking about is progesterone is anti-inflammatory. So as that gets lower, we have to be doing things to make sure we're keeping our inflammation down.
Yep.
And our VO2 max naturally gets a little bit less at this age. So just flooded you with a whole bunch of things, but those are some of
Yeah.
the unique things that happen that athletes need to be aware of during perimenopause.
Yeah, one of the things that I think always gets a little bit confusing when we get to perimenopause and postmenopause is that, like, we already went through a time in puberty when, like, things were crazy and we were trying to figure out what was going on in our body, and we were told back then that, like, these things were going to happen and it's going to take some time until they, like, regulate and you feel normal. But the thing is like, then it's not then said that we're going to do that again in, like, our 40s or 50s. Like, everybody knows that, like, yeah, eventually, well, not everybody, but, like, women are told that, eventually, or you notice from, like, your mom or grandma or people like that, like, eventually, like, oh, we don't have a period anymore. But then there's no further discussion, right? Of, like, again, like, you're going to have to figure out the new status quo, or, like, the new normal, in a sense, once your hormones have shifted and changed. And to, like, just kind of put it into like a useful term, like you mentioned that estrogen can influence our insulin sensitivity. And so basically what that means is that we can become a little bit more insulin resistant. So, and for those of you watching or listening, the thing that you want to keep in mind here is this is where, like, your carbohydrate load is really important. So you used to potentially be able to consume a lot of carbohydrates, fruits, even get away with potentially even drinking a good amount of alcohol too. Not saying that's the best thing, but just saying, like, you might have been able to, like, do a lot on that side of things. And then notice that maybe you're getting a little bit of, like, some weight gain after menopause or during menopause, and you're not really sure where that's coming from. One of the things that Dr. Mandy's talking about here is, like, if you bring your protein up and then we are careful with, like, fruits and carbohydrates, like, you don't have to cut them out completely. It's just we might need to make a slight shift in how much you're consuming and your patterns there. And that often can be the biggest help, I think, for a lot of the athletes that I've worked with and seen, is just making some slight adjustments to our normal routines around food. But so that's just to kind of put that into like a practical perspective. Like when we're talking about insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity, we're talking about basically how your body's dealing with sugar. And so when you get insulin resistance, that's what we're looking at, is like when you take a fruit or a carbohydrate, you can become a little bit more, it can become more difficult to deal with. And so that's where we tend to see that. So loved all of that. That's a really, really great point. So, and you talked about common perimenopause symptoms. Are there any others in there that people might notice, that athletes or women might notice, as far as like symptoms they might be kind of dealing with, that might lead them to maybe want to seek out a functional medicine practitioner, or kind of realize that maybe this isn't entirely normal and maybe I really should find some help here?
Yeah. So, a lot of the common ones like hot flashes.
Yep.
We also can see a lot of mood swings at this time. Um, Vaginal dryness, leakage in your pelvic floor. You might notice that during working out. Headaches, poor sleep, um, loss of sex drive, joint pain, which will be a big one for athletes,
Yeah.
brain fog, fatigue, and also changes just in your uterus, ovaries, and cervix. So again, that can lead to pelvic floor dysfunction, leaking
Yeah.
while you work out. Even if you haven't had kids, that can totally happen to you. And there's definitely ways that we can help with that.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that people maybe don't realize, right? So, like pelvic floor dysfunction or pelvic floor tightness or weakness is something that's just starting to really become a little bit more popular to talk about. And that if you have a little bit of like urine leaking when you're jumping or moving around, or something like that, lifting, any sort of like physical activity, if you're like, oh, that's going to be an exercise that's, I'm going to need to wear my black shorts today, something along those lines, people generally are hearing that that has to do with the pelvic floor muscles, so weak or tight. How can hormones play into that? That's another perspective that I haven't
Mhm.
heard a whole lot about.
Well, progesterone definitely affects your connective tissue. So if when progesterone gets lower, you're going to have less less of that working as well. And estrogen affects the elasticity of those tissues. So now your
Yeah.
elasticity is getting loose. And for a lot of people, even women without kids, I don't have children and I've experienced this. You'll also feel like it might not be leaking so much as you just feel like something's going to like fall out down there, or something's just not right. Like I didn't feel good for a long time jumping rope or jumping on a trampoline. It
Yep.
just felt like something was not going to go well with my organs. Um, yeah. And so there's a lot that we can do as functional medicine doctors with that. And then
Mhm.
there's a lot that can be done also with training your breathing. So if your diaphragm is off, like we're sitting at our desks all day, right? Even after we've worked out, and our diaphragm is off, that's going to affect your pelvic floor.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. So again, here, like what I'm really loving about this so far is just that there's clearly so many options when it comes to just different types of symptoms. Like we tend to hear one way as far as like, this is what, like, go to pelvic floor PT or go see, this person or that person. And the hormone aspect may be really what's the root cause behind the whole thing. And it's being completely neglected as an option, and something that maybe should be at least diagnostically determined if that's an issue or not. And then, you can either rule it out or move forward if there is something that can be done there. Just reiterating again that like there are so many options as far as what could be causing the problem. And I think I'm on this high horse right now, or the soapbox, is just because I just got off an appointment with a patient, and so we were talking about all of the options that she had, and that there wasn't just one. So I think that's why I'm a little bit, my filters like options.
And with
um
hormones, you mentioned hormones, they're a
yeah,
delicate web, right? So
they
I tell
are.
people hormones are like dominoes. When one goes down, they
Yeah.
all go down. So a lot of us are, especially in the last 2 years, experiencing a high amount of stress. So if your cortisol is dysregulated, your sex hormones are going to be off, your thyroid hormone is going to be off. Like
Yes.
I just saw my functional doctor and she was like, if you can get your stress under control, your cholesterol is going to improve, your sleep is going to improve. Like all of your
Yes.
outcomes are going to be better because you worked on this one foundational thing. So that's where, like, again, the functional medicine, the foundational pieces come in.
Yeah, and just to your point too, in your story, like the adrenals are a huge piece of that puzzle. And so if you're dealing with any sort of imbalance going on with your adrenals and how that they are being able to like modulate and monitor your hormones, like they're going to play a really big role in that. Yeah, it's amazing to me too. Like we see also to the functional medicine perspective, like looking at the thyroid, we look at thyroid hormones and then we only focus in on the thyroid as like that's the only issue, and kind of neglect the fact that like there are many different types of hormones in the body, and if one system from the hypothalamus pituitary to the thyroid is imbalanced, there it's highly likely that there are other imbalances happening in the body as well, and yet we're only focusing on like 1/10 of the puzzle. And that can be that can basically lead to other problems down the road as well. Like I love that idea that, or the image that it's a web. The all the hormones are a web and they all function together. That's a great visual. I love that.
Mhm.
Okay, so we hear a lot. You talked about low energy availability being one of the things that's really common, as far as just in athletes in general. So can we talk a little bit more into that, and then the increased risks with peri and post menopause as far as low energy availability goes?
Mhm. And low energy availability, like I said, if you've had it when you were younger, which a lot of us athletes have, because we either weren't eating enough or we were exercising too much, or usually a combination of the two,
Yep.
then these risks were set up years ago. So we have risks to our bone health. We have risks to muscle, and actually we will have more body composition changes because our metabolic rate could be reduced, and so there's going to be signaling to store more fat, store more fat. If your body senses that it's in danger, it's not going to, you're not going to lean out. And the problem is our common thinking is that if I want to lose weight, I need to exercise more and eat less. And then we do things that really aren't optimal, like go into our workouts fasted. How many of us have gone into a morning workout? And I mean, I got away with it 20 years ago. I never ate breakfast before I ran. And now it's
Right.
actually, my body is already at a high cortisol state and it's sensing danger right away. And so I'm not even going to get the training effects of that exercise. And then again, like I said, because we're more susceptible that low energy availability state, in perimenopause, all of our hormones are going to be low. So, like someone like me who dealt with low energy availability when I was younger, um, from the crash 10 years ago, I I do not have any estrogen dominance going on right now. All of my hormones are low. And so
Hmm.
it changes everything. A lot of women say during perimenopause they experience really heavy periods, and that of course affects your exercise, but there's a lot of us, me included, that I do not get heavy periods at all. Very light, and they're shorter cycles. So, we can have all those things going on, and we just want to make sure we're nourishing our body, that our body isn't constantly in some sort of um, sympathetic dominance, which is our fight or flight state, because we're not nourishing ourselves. So, really, really important to eat before you work out and within 30 minutes of working out. And, we've heard different timelines on the fueling window. And I'm going to say, like, for women, the research is solid saying that within 30 minutes, we need to be refueling our muscles.
Yeah. I really want to go back to that cortisol piece and fasting like before workouts. Because one of the things that I hear all the time, and I may actually get this response to this podcast, I may get somebody that comes into my messages and is like, but I feel really good when I am fasted and working out. Like just been a really good program for me. I really like to do that. It feels good. And what I constantly try to like give back in that scenario and like in that situation is that what we're talking about here is what physiologically is happening inside the body. So like this isn't about how you're feeling necessarily. This is what happens when you are in a fasted state. Cortisol goes up. Cortisol can be inflammatory to the body, can cause a lot of changes in the GI tract and in the bacteria in the gut as well, which can then influence your insulin. It can influence your blood sugar. It can influence your hormones. All sorts of things can happen when cortisol is higher. And on top of that, it can, as you have, talked about a lot on this podcast already, it can affect how your adrenals are functioning, which then can influence how your hormones are all functioning. So the point of this here is like just to give more information as far as like these are the things, like let's look at what's happening physiologically first. And if you still feel like you want to take that, like if you still want to work out fasted, okay, like that's your choice to do. You have all the, your own choices to make with your body. If you still have issues though, or concerns that are rooted out of potentially working out fasted, then this is really where this information can be extremely helpful, because number one, we can fix an issue by thinking about what we're talking about here. And number two, we can also prevent issues too, which is a really big piece as well. Um, so gosh, that's just such a like big point, with the adrenals, and as far as like how our body's going to be like responding to all of that. And that plays into the next question I had, which was about stress. So you talked about the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. um, I am finding more and more how modulating the nervous system is such a critical part of health. And that's not just for us as far as like just humans and health, but that's also from an athletic perspective too. Can you speak a little bit to that as far as like stress in and of itself and this whole piece of like that sympathetic nervous system and how that can relate to our health?
Yeah. So there's two arms of the nervous system. There's your sympathetic and parasympathetic part of your nervous system. Sympathetic is fight, flight, or freeze.
Hmm.
Parasympathetic is rest and digest, heal and grow. So we want to be doing more things to bring up that parasympathetic nervous system. Now, what affects the sympathetic nervous system is stressors, physical, chemical, emotional, um, even things like EMFs and being, sitting in front of your computer, which I know is a controversial rabbit hole, but we do know that sitting in front of the computer all day is stressful in many ways.
Yes.
Um, but exercise is also a stressor. And as I said,
Yeah.
exercise is a good stressor. We need stress. We cannot avoid all stress. If you never hit your sympathetic nervous system, that's bad too. But the
Hmm.
problem is our buckets. If you think of stress like a bucket, your buckets are already full, especially in the last 2 years. And you only have so much room in that stress bucket. So if it's overflowing with, kids and taking care of aging parents and a stressful job and not sleeping at night and eating crappy food, if you have all of these stressors already, then you throw in, training for a marathon or a triathlon, that's just going to overflow your bucket.
Right.
And so we want to keep that bucket, empty it out and do things that are nourishing, paying attention to recovery. I don't know if you've had someone on your podcast talk about the vagus nerve,
Yeah.
but doing things that get your vagus nerve up, because vagus nerve is parasympathetic. Just mindfulness, meditation, yoga, all of these things that just calm. And even like when we're in a constant stressed out state, we can't assimilate the nutrients from our food. We're not really digesting our food because we're in fight or flight. Our body wants to run away from lions and tigers. It doesn't really care if you're digesting your food. So now all that
Right.
wonderful, even if you're eating good food, this is where I say that, like, even if you're eating good, stress is going to, counteract that. So even if you're eating good food, you're not getting nutrients from it. So
Right.
you want to slow down, chew your food. I always tell my clients to breathe 5 deep breaths before you eat, not
Yeah.
eating in front of the television, not doing
Yep.
mindful things. This is just being more mindful and tuned in, because our body is not designed to live in a constant state of stress. We are designed to be exposed to the stress and then come back down. And
Mhm.
another little stress hack that I love that most of us athletes are doing is if you're wearing your watches, you have a Garmin or something, they have technology on there. I know Garmin has something called a body battery. I have all of my clients get a Garmin and watch their body battery. So you can actually see what the stress is doing to you. Like, are
Yeah.
you totally tanked by the end of the day? Are you able to recharge at night? Is your sleep restorative?
Sure.
Because all of these things factor in together. We
Mhm.
can have the stressors in our life, but we have to be doing things to calm them down also.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We've talked about the vagus nerve. We've talked about the gut a lot on this podcast, as well as total load too, right? So, like you just mentioned, from stress wise, like yes, being an athlete and working out and training and all of those things are good for the body. Like we were designed to be moving, we were designed to stay moving. Like we really weren't intended to be like sitting all day in front of a computer. Like that's not really how we were meant to be kind of living and moving around. But that being said, because of all the different types of stressors that we have on our and in our lives and on our bodies now at this time day and age, to exercise can be an additional stressor on the body. So we're kind of walking this line of like recovery is just one of those things that's so important. And we actually just barely touched on it. I think this would be a great time to talk a little bit about mitochondria and energy and the perspective of where that fits in here. We've definitely talked about the mitochondria on this podcast quite a bit, but is there something that we kind of need to think about? There were a couple of things you talked about, how inflammation can actually increase in the body during perimenopause, and we know that inflammation can be pretty difficult and tricky for our mitochondria. So are there some impacts that the mitochondria have through the perimenopause postmenopause changes, and what are some of the things we need to think about when it comes to them?
Yeah. So, and an interesting one is that estrogen, the estradiol that I talked about, that becomes lower when we're in perimenopause,
Yeah.
help the mitochondria sweep out those free radicals. So, I guess everyone knows, mitochondria are the energy centers of your cells, so they're
Right.
making the energy, and we naturally have oxidative damage, and so they produce these reactive oxygen species which can damage the mitochondria, but you need the antioxidants to come in and kind of clean that up. Well, and estrogen's kind of helping those antioxidants, those free radicals, do their job. So now you don't have estrogen helping with that. So we just need to kind of adjust our training and nutrition to help clean that up. And with training, I mean, making sure you're getting recovery in. Like recovery was important before, and most of us got away with ignoring it. Now it's super important, and
Yeah.
we can't ignore it.
Yeah.
Just making sure you're getting good nutrition. I'm all for having a brownie once in a while. I like
Totally.
pancakes sometimes after my runs,
Totally.
but eating mostly a whole foods diet, with good clean proteins and good omega-3 fats is going to really help your body have those things. And then sometimes in functional medicine, we recommend some supplements to help your mitochondria. So all kinds of different things. It really depends on the person. You can do things like L-carnitine, and even fish oils can be good. Coenzyme Q10, which is something that gets depleted as we age, can be a really important one.
Yeah, absolutely. And also too, like the mitochondria are a part of what we call inflammaging. So we look at now there's a conversation that's happening, especially in like the functional medicine world, that's really talking about aging from the perspective of it being inflammatory, or we can have this like healthy aging perspective as well, where there's tests coming out now that you can look at like your genetic age and see if you're almost like aging backwards versus like aging forwards. And that's one of the things here that Dr. Mandy's talking about, is that the mitochondria and the health of your mitochondria they do play a really big role in how we age too. And so keeping these antioxidants around, which yeah, through supplements, we can get a lot of them. Also, like eating a rainbow of different types of really colorful fruits and veggies and mixing those up all the time. Like a lot of those help to get those powerful antioxidants in, which can play a really big role, as well as for people who do eat meat, actually sweetbreads and organs. So like your liver and some of the things that we don't tend to eat a whole lot of anymore because a lot of people don't like them. But your organ meats are very nutrient dense and they're really, really high in antioxidants. And so even those can really help play a role when they're scattered in throughout there too, as far as just being food-based sources of some antioxidants. Are there any other kind of like nutrition based things that you would recommend during perimenopause?
Yeah, I think I touched on a little bit
y-
of the
on most of
carbohydrate.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Carbohydrate timing is important.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to have your simple carbs and your starchy carbs, having them around your training is better. Um, and then getting the rest of your carbs from, whole foods like, plants and things like that. And also making sure you get carbs along with your protein after your workout within that
Yeah.
30 minutes, because you have a transporter called GLUT4 that transports it into your cells. So
Yep.
it gets into your muscle and replenishes that glycogen store. So you'll actually use your carbohydrates better, even eating them earlier in the day versus at dinner. So if you
Mhm.
want to have some potatoes or something, having them earlier in the day is better. I always tell women at this age, like eating like a king in the morning, kind of medium at lunch, and then like a pauper at dinner. So dinner should be our smallest meal, which is counterproductive to or counterintuitive to our society, but that's really true. And then
Yeah.
protein, making sure you're getting your protein in 25 to 30 grams with each meal, but especially in that window of 30 minutes after exercise. Um, Not being afraid of fats. Omega-3 fats are great. You want your omega-3s and 6s, but you want them in balance. We tend to get more omega-6s. So getting those good omega-3s like your avocados, coconut oil, nuts, seeds, fatty fish, all really
Sardines.
good. Yes. Staying well hydrated. So that's another thing I forgot to mention is we lose some of our thirst mechanism. And just as we age, I don't know if that's a result of hormones or what exactly the result of that is. But so it was always kind of dumb to wait until you felt thirsty to drink, but
Yeah.
now it's especially not a good idea. So we should just be hydrating throughout the day. And touching on stress, if you are having a higher stress time in your life, adding a pinch of salt, sea salt, or Himalayan pink salt, really good to put in your water because it'll help nourish those adrenals and help restore your electrolyte balance.
Mm.
And then a couple other things that can be helpful is considering reducing caffeine. So I know we all love our caffeine. Definitely, I recommend not drinking coffee past 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If you need to pick me up in the afternoon, maybe movement or sunshine or something. Um, but some of my clients actually say if they gave up that morning coffee, they sleep better at night, even
Oh
that,
yeah, totally.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
first thing in the morning. And then
Mm-hmm.
consuming less alcohol, because it's really, I know it seems to unwind us, we think at the end of the night, but I've actually tracked it on my Garmin. My sleep is much worse when I have alcohol before bed. And it is for most people a lot. It messes with your cortisol and your insulin. And so it's waking
Yeah.
you up at night and you're not getting into your deep restorative sleep, which you need.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll second and third that. Yeah. And again, too, it's not like one of the things whenever I talk about nutrition, I feel like I get some people that respond with like, it seems like almost it's, well, yeah, like there's almost like a little bit of guilt that comes up there, or a little bit of like, oh, I just don't want to like give up coffee, like, or oh, I just don't want to give up alcohol. Like, what's the point in living if I have to like give up all of these things, right? And I'm fully aware that like on this podcast I'm talking to a lot of athletes, so from an athletic perspective, that fairly motivated, right, to like do the things that will help you be able to perform better. So if giving up alcohol is going to help with sleep, it's going to help with recovery, it's going to help with my performance, and I'm going to see an actual benefit from that in my performance, I'm going to be a lot more motivated to do that. But for people who are listening to this podcast and aren't athletes necessarily, and you're kind of like along those lines of like, well, what's the point if I can't drink or if I can't do some of these things? Like, I want to be able to live my life. The point, I think, I and you can chime in on this as well, is like, the point here is that it's all about, um yes, you can have those things around, but like again here, if you are going through perimenopause and you're even post-menopause and you still have hot flashes and you still have some things that are significantly impacting your daily life, right? They're like hot flashes that are waking you up multiple times at night. So your quality of sleep is awful, or maybe not as great as you would want it to be. There's many spectrums there, or, there's other symptoms that are really holding you back, like having energy and feeling vibrant and like you can thrive through life, or any of the number of things that are associated. This is where some of these can be extremely helpful. Like just eliminating alcohol most nights out of the week can make a significant impact on how you are living and on just those symptoms alone. So, just trying to tie this back here, and as far as like if you have that sort of a response, like this is what we're suggesting as far as like things to try that may significantly improve those symptoms without a whole lot of intervention. Like just giving up like a glass of wine a night or maybe multiples for some, that alone can have such a big impact. And that's kind of what you can chime in here too, but that's kind of what we're talking about.
And to experiment with it, you might
Yeah.
not even notice that it's affecting you. You might not be linking it, but you give it up and you're like, wow, I really am sleeping better. Or, and another thing I
Yeah.
always tell my clients is that, the body whispers and then it gets louder and louder and louder until it has to
Yeah.
shout. Right. So, I mean, some of these, like, oh, I get more soreness after a workout, or I have more fatigue, or, whatever your symptoms are, they might be minor now. And you might be like, well, I really don't want to give up that coffee and alcohol, but, I can deal with this fatigue, or I can deal with it, in 10 or 20 years, what does it look like? I don't want to be doom and gloom, but, heart disease, cancers, all of these things, chronic illnesses, autoimmune disorders, they are all lifestyle acquired conditions. So,
Right.
it's things that we can do so that we're healthier down the road.
Yep. Exactly. Oh, I love it. Okay. Well, I have a final question for you. The effects, like, what are some of the effects of menopause on basically just like well-being and performance? I feel like we've talked about them a lot, like a decent portion of all of them, but are there any left that we haven't covered as far as, um, just the effects that some of those changes can have? Like, I know from a menopause perspective, like you mentioned VO2 max being one of the things that can be impacted as far as menopause goes. Are there any others that we can potentially see?
Yeah, so we talked about a lot of them,
Hmm.
the increased body fat, or just change in body composition, especially gaining more around the middle.
Yep.
Um, yeah, the VO2 max we talked about. You become dehydrated more easily because, number one, you lose the thirst mechanism, but number two, a lot of that increased sweating. Um, your lean
Yeah.
muscle starts to decrease, so that's
Yeah.
going to affect your performance and
And
how you feel.
it's harder to build muscle as
Mhm.
well. So we have to, increase protein and make some changes there to make sure that we maintain that muscle mass. It's not to say that it's impossible, right? But we also have to know that like our body's going to be leaning towards the losing muscle. So we have to change part of how we work out, some of our strength sessions, some of our long runs and endurance runs. Like some of that might need to be traded out for some more strength training based workouts to help keep that muscle mass up. There's a lot of things there. Okay, keep going. Sorry, I had to
Yeah,
jump
well,
in there.
that's a big one you just touched on too. Like women, we are adapted to utilize fatty acids. So we don't need more of that zone two training, that long, slow distance. Unfortunately, that's what, a lot of us love doing,
Yeah.
who are, runners and cyclists and stuff like
Uh-huh.
that. And I'm not saying you can't do it. I go out and do something longer on the weekends, whether it's a long bike ride or a long run, but it's not so much the pillars of my weekly training. And I was
Right.
someone who hated the weight room before I hit perimenopause. I only did it when I had to.
Mm.
And now I religiously lift 3 days a week. And the other thing with lifting is you want to be lifting heavy stuff. So I get a lot of clients that come to me and they're like, oh, my daughter told me to go get some 5 and 10 pound weights and just do these videos on YouTube. And it's not enough stimulus to your muscles to synthesize and grow and do all the things they need to do. So you need to be lifting heavy stuff where you can't
Hmm.
lift more than, 5 or 6 reps. And
Yeah.
I always recommend getting an experienced professional. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of them out there who know what they're doing with menopause and perimenopause. So I have like two or three that I refer to who work virtually, like this. So yeah, but definitely making sure that you're doing those things so that you can continue to be active and enjoy life. Because I don't know about the listeners here, but I'm sure we're all kind of similar in that, we don't want to age just to sit in our rocking chairs and watch the news, right? We want to be out and active and doing all the outdoor things that we love to do, and
Mhm.
even having the energy to play with our grandkids and things like that, right? So if you want to remain active, you're going to need to do these things. And then building that muscle will help down the road with your, bone density. And especially when you get into your 60s and 70s, decreasing your chances of fall risk.
Yep. That's like my main goal in life is like to stay moving and to be one of those people. I think it's like
Mhm.
I picture myself being like 80, but potentially even 90 years old and still like trying to, get out there and move and doing a lot. And anyway, that's like my number one like future forward goal. Oh man. Anything else on there on your list?
I think I hit on all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds pretty comprehensive to me. Okay. Is there anything else on this podcast that we didn't mention that you feel would be like helpful to talk about? Anything else there?
Gosh, I feel like I've hit on everything.
I know. I
Yeah.
feel like this is very comprehensive in a sense of like there's so many different aspects, right, that we could be looking at when it comes to perimenopause, postmenopause, and all of the things that are associated with that, especially for athletes. So here's a question. First off, how can people find you? And do you have a freebie or anything like that that people might be interested in?
Yes. So you can go to my website, which I don't know if you can put it in the show notes, but
Oh, I
it's,
definitely will. I'll get it from
yeah,
you. Mhm.
it's drmandymarziaz.com. She'll put the spelling in the show notes for
Will
you.
do.
Not
It'll be
easy one
there.
to spell. And on my website, you can download a free PDF. Just gonna cost you your email address, but the PDF is 5 ways to get your mojo back, because I know a lot of us
Love
are
that.
feeling like we lost our mojo in perimenopause. And yeah, so you can get that and then get on my list. And I send out email newsletter about twice a month with lots of information, kind of like what Dr. Kirsten has on the show.
Yeah.
And just things that you can learn to help make your transition during this time even better.
I love it. Oh, Dr. Mandy, thank you for being here. This was amazing. I know that this is going to be helpful for sure for many people. I'm so excited to be able to talk about this and keep this conversation going because for some reason, it just seems like information as far as women's health and healthcare is just you got to learn it from somewhere else. So hopefully these conversations are helpful resources. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time just to, put all of that in and share all of that with us today.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me on the show. It was fun.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. And I will be back next week with another episode. Take care and I'll see you then.